Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are turning our attention east, and we're looking at a part of the world that, well, it's often defined by these two huge opposing forces. On one hand, you have this rapid, just seemingly unstoppable change, economic, technological, and on the other you have this really profound human challenge of just trying to keep up.
But keeping pace with that velocity? Yeah.
Exactly. We're talking about the incredible momentum across Asia. I mean, you see the headlines all the time, right? The digital economy is just surging from Jakarta all the way to Shenzhen.
The sheer demographic power alone is staggering.
It is. And the innovation hubs that are creating these huge global shifts in manufacturing and AI and finance, it's an unbelievably young, vibrant population that's driving all of this kinetic energy.
It is, but that's where our sources for today ask us to pause for a moment. They're based on years of work in mentorship, leadership observation, and they really touch on insights from Global Leadership Insights 2030. And they ask us to look beneath the surface, to look past the headline numbers.
Right, to go beyond just the economic infrastructure.
Exactly. To understand the emotional, the intellectual foundation that this generation actually needs to sustain all that momentum, and, I think this is the crucial part, to actually lead.
And that sounds like the paradox we really need to unpack today, because when we talk about this generation fueling, I mean, some of the fastest shifts the world has ever seen.
We have to look beyond the visible success, beyond the speed.
Right.
What our source material consistently highlights is a profound, almost contradictory feeling running just underneath all of that external activity. It's that beneath the momentum, so many young people feel, well, they feel profoundly lost, terribly overwhelmed, and burdened by a weight that is almost impossible for them to even articulate.
That sounds like a silent crisis that's unfolding inside of a very visible, very loud boom. What is it that defines this internal conflict?
It's the central conflict, I think, of the modern Asian experience. The world they live in feels unbearably crowded.
And you don't just mean physically crowded, like in a city?
No, not just physically, though of course that's often true in places like Manila or Mumbai. I mean, psychologically crowded.
Oh.
Expectations aren't just there. They stack. They stack like high-rise towers, seemingly endless, just pushing up against the sky, demanding compliance, demanding performance. There's just no quiet space left to simply be.
That imagery, expectations stacking like high-rise towers, that really captures the pressure. It's vertical. It's relentless.
It's absolutely relentless. And what's so fascinating, and what the source material really emphasizes, is that this feeling is universal. It's not isolated. It crosses all these cultural and national boundaries.
So it's not just one country's problem.
Not at all. You hear this deep, often very quiet question in wildly different settings. You hear it in the hyper-competitive streets of Seoul, in the rapid growth of Bangkok and Jakarta.
The massive economies like Mumbai, Beijing.
And in dynamic hubs like Manila and Hanoi. They are all whispering the same trembling question just beneath the surface of all their ambition.
And what's the question?
How do I build a future when I can barely hear myself in the noise?
Wow. So we're essentially diagnosing an internal crisis that's hidden inside this external boom. And our sources seem to suggest the problem isn't a lack of talent.
No, the talent is abundant. The raw potential is everywhere.
It's something more subtle then, something that's holding them back from turning that talent into real leadership.
Precisely. The diagnosis offered is razor sharp on this point. The issue is not a deficit of talent, it's a deficit of direction. And it's the constant, relentless erosion of focus.
The erosion of focus.
Yes. Look, potential exists everywhere you turn across the continent, in every university hall, every research lab, every startup garage. But clarity, that sharp, intentional, self-defined path, that is startlingly absent.
And that lack of clarity is the pivot point.
It's everything. Without it, all of that magnificent potential, it just becomes noise. It becomes background static that fatigues the mind instead of propelling any kind of meaningful action.
That defines our mission for this deep dive perfectly then. We are going into the necessary internal infrastructure for Asia's youth to move from that raw, unfocused potential to sustained, impactful action. And our analysis today is going to rest on three pillars that we have to explore in detail: the crisis of focused intention, the barriers to authentic communication, and the foundational need for self-knowledge.
All interconnected.
Let's start with that first immediate threat, the focus crisis itself. Okay, so when we talk about the speed of modern Asia, what we're really describing is an environment of just relentless overstimulation.
Constant.
And the sources, they highlight a few key factors that all converge to create this mental fatigue. And it's not just one thing, right? It's digital, and it's also deeply cultural.
That convergence is the critical point. It's exactly that. We're not just talking about global pressures like every young person faces. We're talking about how that global digital speed intersects with these very entrenched, very high-stakes cultural demands.
So let's break that down. On the digital front, what does that pressure look like?
It's constant. I mean, social media is just flooding them with perpetual comparisons. There's this sense that everyone else is achieving faster, they're traveling further, they're starting bigger companies.
And it feeds into that toxic hustle myth.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
The illusion that success is supposed to be instantaneous, that it requires sacrificing your sleep, your health, your personal life, the whole architecture of the digital space, especially, the short-form video formats. It literally trains the brain for instant, shallow gratification.
Not for deep work.
Never for deep work. The reward cycle is just too quick, too loud, too addictive.
It's that feeling of exhaustion from constantly comparing your real messy life to everyone else's perfectly curated highlight reel.
Yes, and then you layer the cultural expectations right on top of that digital pressure.
Expectations that pull really strongly toward obedience, toward visible, measurable achievement.
Exactly. And the sources capture this cultural weight so beautifully. They describe academic pressure as acting like a second gravity.
A second gravity. I like that analogy.
What's a superb analogy, because gravity is constant, it's pervasive, and it's pretty much unavoidable. And this pressure, it's not just about getting good grades. It's intrinsically tied to societal validation, to family honor.
And the economic future of not just them, but maybe their whole family.
Often the entire extended family unit, yes.
So can you elaborate on that a bit? How does the second gravity actually show up in different parts of Asia? Because it sounds like a lot more than just, studying hard for a test.
It is so much more. You have to consider the reality in a place like South Korea, with its intense private academy culture, the hagwon.
Right, the after-school cram schools.
Or the unbelievable pressure surrounding the gaokao in China. These are not just supplementary educational systems. These are high-stakes, multi-billion-dollar industries. They are driven by immense parental financial sacrifice and this core belief that the only valid path to success is through securing a spot in a top-tier university and then a very small handful of approved, stable careers. Law, medicine, elite finance.
So an individual's actual passion or interest becomes almost irrelevant.
It's a luxury they often can't afford. This gravitational pull, it forces young people into these conforming shapes and paths, regardless of their own internal desires. They're told, either implicitly or explicitly, that their personal identity has to be subservient to the collective achievement, to the family's upward mobility.
Which is why the sources say the young mind shaping its identity just moves too fast in this environment.
It can never slow down. It can never slow down enough to listen to itself, because the external consequence of slowness, of reflection, is perceived as absolute catastrophic failure.
Okay, so in this perfect storm of overwhelm, where fragmentation is the default setting for your mind, how do the sources redefine focus? Because it's usually taught as this rigid, painful discipline.
And that's where the key insight is so powerful, because it addresses the internal psychological need first. Focus, according to these sources, isn't about achieving perfection. It's not even really a discipline you have to force yourself into.
Right.
It is fundamentally about survival.
Survive.
It functions as a shield against the fragmentation that's caused by all that digital noise and all that societal gravity. The sources state it very plainly. Focus is not perfection. Focus is protection.
Protection.
Yeah.
That really shifts the mindset. It moves it away from feeling like an obligation and more towards agency. How is it protective in this context?
It's protective because it's the intentional act of choosing one meaningful step and then staying with it. Staying with it long enough for that step to actually accumulate into something real, instead of scattering your attention across 20 different low-value tasks. When your entire environment, digital and familial, is designed to pull you in a million directions.
To measure you by your immediate availability, your frantic output.
Yes. In that environment, focus is the decision to hold yourself together. It's an act of reclaiming sovereignty over your own attention, which, as we've established, is the most valuable commodity being drained from them.
That still feels a little abstract. I mean, if the world is constantly demanding speed, the solution has to feel accessible, right? Something grounding that can actually counter that pressure. But I have to ask, because I'm sure someone listening is thinking this. The source suggests a simple rhythm. 25 minutes of quiet work, 5 minutes of breath. For a crisis that's defining an entire continent's youth, doesn't that sound, I don't know, almost too simple, too easy?
That is a critical question, and it's exactly why we need to spend some time on this. The simplicity is deceptive. The technique is simple, of course. It's based on fundamental principles like the Pomodoro rhythm. It just gives the brain an achievable target and a very explicit rest period.
Okay, so the technique is simple.
But the difficulty is in the consistency. And more than that, it's in the psychological commitment it takes to even start. For so many young people who are caught between the short-form video cycles, their side hustles, the academic overload, the constant notification pings, for them, just adhering to that 125-minute block is the first time they truly and intentionally resist all of those external demands.
It's a moment of deliberate silence.
It is. It's the first time they might actually meet their own mind without a mediating screen or an external judge in the room.
So the power isn't in the timer on your phone. It's in the intentional resistance that using the timer represents. It's like a small, temporary rebellion against the speed of everything.
Precisely. If the environment of modern Asia is moving too fast for a young person to shape their identity, these small, consistent acts of focus become these incredibly powerful counterweights to the pressure of proving yourself through external speed and conformity.
So by adopting this simple rhythm, they're making a statement.
They're declaring, my worth is not measured by the speed of my external output, but by the quality and the intentionality of my internal presence. And that consistency, over time, it builds the internal rudder.
Without which they're just lost at sea.
Exactly. Without it, even the most talented student or the most promising young entrepreneur will be constantly fragmented, just pouring their energy into these short-term bursts that never, ever accumulate into a powerful long-term trajectory.
That's why focus is survival.
It is the essential first step. It's how you start converting that raw, chaotic potential into intentional, directional leadership.
And that intentional direction is what they need if they're going to counter that societal gravity, the one that insists they follow these established, predictable paths, whether or not those paths mean anything to them personally.
Yes.
That shift in internal control, it should, ideally, empower the next phase, interacting with the world. But now we have to transition to the next big hurdle, the challenges of external communication. If self-imposed silence is the protection against internal noise, what happens when that protective silence meets the deeply entrenched power structures outside the individual?
And that is the perfect hinge for this transition. A young person achieves, maybe for the first time, a small measure of internal clarity. But the world they have to step back into is defined by these incredibly complex cultural matrices. And the source material is very clear on this. The barrier is not the ability to speak. I mean, this generation is globally connected. They're often multilingual.
So what is the barrier then?
It's the ability to communicate effectively and, maybe more importantly, authentically across these very specific cultural layers.
So what you're saying is communication in Asia is deeply tied to navigating identity and power and context. And the profound meaning of silence itself.
It's a minefield of social calculation.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. We have to synthesize just how profound this connection is. In so many East and Southeast Asian cultures, the relationship between the speakers often dictates the message more than the words of the message itself.
So it's not what you say, it's who you're saying it to.
And who you are in relation to them. There's an intense emphasis on saving face, on maintaining harmony, the concept of wa, and on demonstrating the proper deference. And this is why the anecdotes shared in the sources are so vivid and, frankly, so painful. They reveal the paralysis this calculation creates.
Let's unpack those examples then to really understand these subtle power dynamics. Let's start with the young Filipino student in Seoul who feels too expressive.
Okay. This one immediately highlights the tension between two highly developed but very distinct cultural norms. Filipino culture often encourages warmth, a certain directness, and open emotional display. Now, you transport that individual into the highly reserved, hierarchically sensitive environment of Seoul. Maybe it's a corporate office, maybe an academic institution, and that student feels compelled to self-censor.
So their natural personality becomes a liability.
Their natural expressiveness, which would be totally normal and welcome at home, is suddenly perceived as, well, maybe aggressive or disruptive or simply unprofessional in this new context. The individual is then forced to diminish their own identity just to conform.
Okay, what about the next one? The Malaysian graduate who whispers that disagreeing with her boss feels disrespectful. I mean, that hits right at the core of workplace innovation.
It captures the fear of hierarchy in active operation. In so many corporate environments across the region, direct disagreement with an elder or a superior, even if the idea being offered is objectively correct and would benefit the company, it's not just a professional hurdle.
It's a social breach.
It's a profound social breach. It risks causing the superior to lose face, which is seen as disrespecting the established social and professional order. And the preservation of that order is often seen as far more important than the immediate truth of whatever idea is being discussed.
So if innovation requires challenging the status quo,
This fear locks it down. It locks down critical thinking at the mid and junior levels. Good ideas simply die in silence.
we also hear about the Japanese student who fears that speaking honestly might break the harmony. That concept of wa harmony, it's central, but how does that cultural value become a constraint in a modern workplace that actually stifles the next generation?
Well, the maintenance of wa means avoiding conflict at all costs. It means prioritizing group cohesion above almost anything else, including individual input or an uncomfortable truth.
So in a modern corporate setting, that translates into,
It translates into a debilitating fear of providing genuine critical feedback. For example, a junior manager in Tokyo might rather spend 3 extra days finding some convoluted technical workaround, a patch solution, than to suggest a simple, elegant fix that would publicly contradict a senior manager's initial proposal.
so they're not calculating the efficiency of the solution.
No. They're calculating the emotional cost of the delivery. And this slows down decision-making, it masks real problems, and it completely inhibits necessary institutional learning.
And the last one is the Vietnamese student. Sounds perfectly confident in English, but internally is afraid of every word. That one really speaks to the sheer internal pressure of performance.
It reveals the mask of competence. It's a mask this generation often wears so well. They have mastered all the external requirements, the language, the professional dress, the technical skills, but they remain internally paralyzed.
Where does that fear come from?
That fear stems from the high stakes of misuse or misinterpretation or overstepping. Every single word is weighted. Is it too much? Is it too direct? Does it betray my relative position in the hierarchy? It's an internal performance anxiety tied not just to professional success, but to this intricate web of social belonging.
They're exhausted.
They are exhausted by the relentless internal calculation that is required to simply exist in these contexts.
So communication in this world is less about the skill of rhetoric and more about surviving this intense, exhausting, and often contradictory social calculation.
Absolutely. The synthesis provided in the source material here is deeply insightful. It says that communication in this context is the sophisticated art of listening without losing oneself, speaking without offense, and expressing without erasing.
That last part, expressing without erasing, that seems to be the key to unlocking leadership, doesn't it?
It is.
It means you have to assert your viewpoint, your identity, while still recognizing and respecting the existing cultural context. It demands immense emotional intelligence.
And if the rising generation can't master this art, if they remain paralyzed by this fear of speaking wrongly or speaking too much, then Asia cannot truly achieve its stated global potential.
Because the best ideas are being suppressed.
Ideas that could redefine entire industries or solve massive social challenges are just being left on the table. The implication is staggering. Entire continents of potential are being held back because the perceived social cost of expression is just too high.
This stifles the entrepreneurial spirit.
And, critically, it prevents the development of the ethical feedback mechanisms that you need for mature, modern governance and leadership. I mean, think about it. If you can't give honest feedback, corruption and stagnation, they just flourish in the dark.
So finding a way to introduce a dissenting or a necessary view without causing offense, that's the core test of leadership for this generation.
Yes.
But achieving that balance, it requires immense self-knowledge, which I guess confirms our hypothesis. This communication crisis is a direct symptom of a deeper, unaddressed internal deficit.
Exactly. If a young person doesn't have a clear, internally defined sense of self, what they stand for, what their non-negotiables are, their external voice will naturally be subservient to the loudest, most demanding expectations.
Whether that's a manager, a parent, or an algorithm.
That's right. And this brings us directly to the missing foundation, the infrastructure of self-knowledge.
Okay, so we move now to what our sources call the quiet enemy that shapes all of these struggles. distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very clear that this must not be seen as some simple character flaw, like being lazy or lacking willpower.
We have to challenge that narrative.
Right. It's a chronic, visible symptom of profound overwhelm.
Yes. It is, as the sources articulate, a manifestation of the intense mental load that's been placed upon this generation. The sources outline what we can call the fatigue paradox.
The fatigue paradox. What is that?
Young people across Asia feel tired. Often they feel exhausted before the day even truly begins.
And why is that? It's not because their lives are empty.
Quite the opposite. It's because their minds never rest. They are constantly juggling the obligations of that second gravity we talked about. They're cycling through the emotional fatigue of navigating these complex social hierarchies. They're managing multiple side jobs just to afford the escalating cost of living. And crucially, they're managing the relentless cognitive drain of digital availability.
They're always on.
Always on and always performing.
It's that constant state of mental exhaustion. It's caused by continuous availability and the pressure to perform for this invisible audience online.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where distraction shifts its role. It goes from being something trivial to being a genuine psychological refuge.
That analysis is deeply important. Distraction becomes the mind's escape hatch. When life feels too heavy, when the expectations are too complex, or when the weight of that stacking tower of expectations becomes unbearable, the mind naturally seeks the shallow, immediate, and effortless reward.
The infinite scroll,
Mm-hmm.
the short-form video, the casual game on your phone.
Whatever it may be. And the mentor voice in the sources, it delivers the painful truth here. It says, no one can build a future they keep escaping from.
That's a powerful line.
It is. Distraction is a powerful narcotic. It provides immediate relief, but it ensures that the foundational problems remain completely unaddressed. This generation isn't suffering from a lack of time. They are suffering from too many leaks in their intentionality.
Fewer leaks, not more hours.
They desperately need fewer leaks, fewer places where their energy is scattered and wasted, not simply more hours added to their already overloaded schedules.
So if distraction is the refuge, what's the necessary foundation that's missing? What's the infrastructure that would make that escape unnecessary in the first place?
Well, the sources point toward a foundational need for self-reflection that is currently and conspicuously absent from many traditional educational models across Asia.
This is the missing curriculum.
It is the missing curriculum. For decades, education across the continent has brilliantly trained its youth for compliance and for measurable technical output. They learn how to study, how to work within a system, how to obey hierarchical directives. These skills are measured, they're valued, they're rewarded. But they're rarely, if ever, taught how to ask the fundamental questions of self-direction. The profound, quiet inquiries that define internal clarity, they just remain unanswered because they are considered a luxury, not a necessity.
What are those core foundational questions that create this knowledge gap? What are they fundamentally missing the space to ask themselves?
They are the inquiries that are, I would argue, prerequisite for any meaningful, resilient life choice. They need the space to ask, who am I when no one is measuring me? When the test scores are put away and the parent is not in the room?
Yeah, that's a big question.
A huge one. And what truly energizes me? What replenishes my internal reserves versus what relentlessly drains me, even if it looks like success on the outside?
Right, and what do I actually want?
Divorced from the expectations placed upon me by my family, my peers, or by social media. And this is the crucial one. Which expectations belong to me and which were handed down to me and must therefore be politely but firmly declined?
These questions are terrifying.
Yeah.
They're terrifying precisely because answering them requires the individual to stop and to listen to that quiet internal voice, the very voice they've spent so much energy trying to drown out with noise and external achievement.
It demands a level of internal honesty that is not, frankly, culturally encouraged.
And this leads to the source's core thesis on what preparation for the future really means.
It does. Self-knowledge is not a luxury. It is not a soft skill. It is certainly not something you can just put off for retirement. It is fundamental infrastructure. If you don't possess this internal map, if you haven't identified your values, your strengths, your vulnerabilities, you are essentially rudderless. The world, with its high expectations, its algorithmic demands, its cultural gravity, it will simply pull you in every direction until you are exhausted and your potential is depleted.
But with self-knowledge, the limited resources this young generation has, whether that's time or money or emotional energy, they can be deployed with precision.
Exactly. It's the difference between a high-speed vehicle with clear GPS coordinates and the same vehicle just spinning its wheels in a mud pit, wasting fuel. The potential is immense, but the application is fatally flawed without that clarity.
And it all ties back to the communication problem.
It ties back directly to the hierarchy challenge we discussed. If a young person knows what truly energizes them and why they are pursuing a specific path, they have the internal resilience and the clarity to politely and intelligently negotiate the expectations of a senior manager or a demanding family member.
If they don't.
If they don't know what they truly want, they simply collapse under the weight of those handed-down expectations because they have no internal counter-argument. Self-knowledge is the ultimate protector of intentionality.
So this internal clarity, which is derived from self-knowledge, it should logically empower the next external step, right? The courage to ask for help or to seek collaboration or pursue difficult, non-traditional opportunities.
It should.
But the sources highlight another profound cultural hurdle here, the hesitation to ask.
And this hesitation, again, it isn't a lack of ambition or some kind of laziness. It's deeply rooted in a cultural training that values resilience through suffering.
So they avoid reaching out.
Many young Asians avoid reaching out, whether it's for mentorship or financial aid or even just a simple clarification, because they fear the shame of disappointment.
Yeah.
They fear the risk of burdening others. Or, particularly in these high-context cultures, they fear the appearance of being disrespectful or incompetent.
They have been raised to endure quietly.
Yes.
That pressure to endure quietly, it means they internalize all these struggles that could often be solved externally. With just a simple question, a collaborative request.
Yeah.
This must have massive, destructive consequences for building mentorship networks.
It creates a self-imposed isolation, and it completely stifles institutional memory transfer from one generation to the next. However, the source material immediately pivots this fear into a really powerful lesson on leadership itself.
Okay, how so?
Leadership does not begin by dictating answers. It begins by asking a question. And the subsequent outcome of asking that question needs to be entirely reframed, moving away from this black and white definition of success or failure.
How does the source reframe the risks of asking them? How does it position it not as a personal failure, but as a necessary functional process of growth?
It introduces this wonderful concept of filtering.
Filtering.
When you put yourself out there, when you ask for help or direction or collaboration, you are initiating a filtering process on your environment. It's a necessary mechanism for sorting reality.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, sometimes people say yes and they offer guidance. Sometimes they ignore you entirely. Sometimes they misjudge your background or your resources. And sometimes they misunderstand your intentions completely because of cultural gaps.
And that feeling of being misunderstood or ignored or just flat out rejected, that is exactly what stops people from asking again. It feels like this painful personal rejection.
And that is the crucial mental block that we have to dismantle. The source insists. That is not failure, that is filtering. You are not measuring your worth. You are separating what is currently possible from what is not. You're separating what aligns with your path from what does not.
So the outcome of a single ask doesn't define you.
Not at all. A no doesn't define you. And on the other side of that coin, a yes doesn't complete you or guarantee permanent success.
So what does define you then, if not that singular outcome?
Consistency builds you. The strength is not in the success rate of the individual query, but in the relentless, methodical process. If you consistently show up, you consistently ask, you consistently refine your approach based on the filters you encounter, whether that's a yes, a no, or just silence.
That is what creates a sustainable, resilient path.
That's it. The core message is stark. If you cannot ask, you cannot grow. If you cannot collaborate across cultures and generations, you cannot scale your ideas to the complexity that modern Asia requires.
This moves the whole conversation away from demanding individual perfection and moves it toward dynamic, consistent engagement, which is really the only way to meet the scale of transformation that Asia's undertaking.
And this leads us to the overall optimistic vision for change that the sources provide. They conclude that Asia doesn't need external saving. It needs enabling by its own youth. The responsibility lies within this emerging cohort of leaders to build that internal foundation, the self-knowledge, the courage to engage for sustainable, ethical growth.
So if this generation accepts that mandate, what does this enabling look like in practice? The source outlines some essential internal and external elements required for this transformation, the pillars of transformation.
Yes, there are 7 pillars. And they form this comprehensive vision for the resilient future Asian leader, moving beyond just technical skill alone. First, they must cultivate mentorship, ensuring they break that isolation of enduring quietly by actively seeking guidance.
Okay, that's number one.
Second, they must ensure digital access and literacy are used for productive creation, not just passive consumption. Third, they must rigorously practice self-discipline, which is really just the consistent application of focus and self-knowledge.
And what about on the external application side of things?
There, they need to harness the spirit of entrepreneurship. And that's defined not just as starting a company, but as actively seeking creative solutions to systemic problems.
Right.
They must develop genuine intercultural competence, which means navigating the hierarchies we discussed without erasing their own voice. They have to build emotional resilience to withstand that filtering process we talked about, to deal with rejection and failure without giving up.
And the final pillar.
And finally, and maybe most importantly, all of this has to be anchored in a firm commitment to ethical leadership.
That ethical component feels critical. In an environment of such rapid, sometimes chaotic growth, ethical leadership really becomes the guardrail.
It is the guardrail. Precisely. These 7 elements are symbiotic. You can't have ethical leadership without the emotional resilience to make hard, unpopular choices. And you can't have sustainable entrepreneurship without the self-discipline to manage the immense pressure and risk inherent in a high-speed environment. It's an integrated system.
So the ultimate choice for this generation, then, it's about intentionality. It's about choosing long-term direction over the seductive short-term noise.
It is. It's about committing to build trust, patiently and consistently, rather than constantly performing for immediate transactional applause. It is about actively resisting the pervasive shortcut culture that promises speed but only delivers fragility.
The future of the continent belongs to those who choose clarity.
And who stay with their path long enough for it to become robust, intentional, and real.
And this is where the mentorship voice in our source material really closes the loop, isn't it? It speaks directly to those young people who are feeling overwhelmed, whether they're in the rapidly expanding secondary cities like Chengdu or Ulaanbaatar, or the big established hubs like Seoul, Manila, Taipei, or Kuala Lumpur.
Yes, it addresses that paralyzing quest for certainty.
And what does it say?
The final encouragement is profoundly simple, yet it's incredibly liberating because it removes that pressure of perfection. It says, you don't need certainty, you need movement. So to synthesize the journey we've taken today, the future of the continent, it really hinges not on some external policy shift, but on a very clear, very internal choice.
Choosing clarity.
Choosing clarity and then staying with that intentional path, even when it's obscured by all the external expectations and all the internal noise. The youth who will lead are the ones who have made focus their protection and self-knowledge their infrastructure.
And that message resonates everywhere.
It resonates across every emerging market and every established hub because the human condition of seeking meaning, it remains the same regardless of the GDP growth rates.
And that final instruction from the source material, it's so actionable and liberating. You don't need certainty, you need movement. But how should that movement begin, especially if you are still feeling afraid or imperfectly focused?
The instruction is to begin quietly. Begin imperfectly. Begin without the expectation of immediate applause or external validation.
Start even when you're afraid.
Start even when you are afraid. The movement should not be a frantic run, trying to catch up with some external, digitally imposed timeline. It should be a steady, consistent walk.
With heart, with patience, with intention.
Exactly. Those small, intentional footsteps are what gradually make the path beneath you real and durable.
The ultimate success of Asia's next decade, as it's tied into these long-term reflections of Global Leadership Insights 2030, it's really rooted in this fundamental choice of internal infrastructure over external performance.
Absolutely. The provocative thought we'd like to leave you with connects this intimate internal work to the grand scale of global leadership. The future of the continent is shaped not by how loudly it talks about its future, all the hype, all the endless headlines of growth,
Right.
but rather how calmly, how steadily, and how courageously its youth builds it, moment by moment, conversation by conversation, choice by choice.
So we ask you to consider, based on this deep dive into the need for infrastructure, what small, quiet step of intentional focus can you take today that will actually matter in the long term? What is the one thing you can choose to stay with, imperfectly, that makes your footsteps real? Let that small, deliberate movement be your starting point. Thank you for diving deep with us.